For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sandra Hasty, the principal of Rangirumu Girls' School, and it was indeed a privilege to work with Megan from Presbyterian Support. I think our students got so much, and our staff, out of being part of that project. It is indeed my pleasure this morning to introduce our next speaker, Shaun Robinson. He has a wealth of experience and background in the area of health and social services, an area that he's worked in for over 30 years. In his many and varied roles, he's held 4 CEO positions in non-for-profit organisations. And when I read Shaun's bio, I reflected on the talk we had yesterday as heads, that part of being in a Presbyterian church school is that we are known for the pastoral care that we give for our students. And I think we all sat there and nodded yesterday that gets increasingly difficult. We're dealing with more and more cases of anxiety, of mental health, not only with our students, but also with our families and our parents. And it is indeed challenging, isn't it, as to how we balance up the whole area of pastoral care. So I'm really excited that you're going to come and share with us, to give us, we hope, some pearls of wisdom, maybe some tools as to how we can better manage the needs for our students. So please join with me in welcoming Shaun.
Thank you very much. Ka tangi tititi, ka tangi te ka tangi hoki ko Aotea Māori ora. Well, thank you for that introduction. I should probably give my Presbyterian credentials too. My father was a Presbyterian minister, my uncle was a Presbyterian minister, my sister is a Presbyterian minister, her husband is a Presbyterian minister, my cousin Stephanie is a Presbyterian minister, my mother was a Presbyterian elder, and I was a youth worker in a uniting church in Australia for a while, and I was the chief executive of one of the regions of Presbyterian Support, so there's no getting away from it, I'm afraid. At the moment I'm the Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation of New Zealand, and it's an incredible privilege to kind of serve in that role. And I do think that everything that has happened to me in my life and all the experiences that I've had have kind of combined to put me in the right place at the right time. So, yeah, I want to sort of share with you some thoughts about mental health in the schools space. And I think whenever I start talking, around this, any aspect of mental health, there's a fundamental question that I think we need to consider, and that is, what is mental health? And it's interesting because when you think mental health, I'm not going to ask you to give a show of hands, but I'm sure many of you immediately go to a negative. We tend to often think of mental health as, in fact, mental illness. So we wouldn't say I had mental health last year, I had physical health last year, meaning I was unwell, but that often is the way that people think of mental health. We have probably 1,000 people who are supporting us in fundraising at any one time. Quite often I'll see in their little testimonials or whatever they're communicating things like, I had mental health earlier this year, therefore I'm really committed to supporting the Mental Health Foundation. We all have mental health. We have mental health right now, just as we have physical health right now. Sometimes it can be more positive, sometimes it can be more challenging. So, getting to that question of what is mental health, traditionally, there's supposed to be an arrow between those two things. Something's not showing up on this. Traditionally, there we go. This is a delay. Traditionally, we sort of think of mental health in sort of 2 dimensions. Sort of, if you imagine, there's supposed to be visible an axis up there between sort of mental distress or mental illness at one end of that axis, and kind of really just the lack of that at the other end. We haven't really thought what it is we're talking about in terms of what's not mental illness. Yeah? And this has been driven and is driven, I think, by a lot of fear and stigma around mental illness and around the kind of symptoms of mental distress. But it's a very two-dimensional and simplistic view of what our mental and emotional life and health actually is. And so, we've been very influenced at the Mental Health Foundation by the science of well-being and really the science of happiness, which has been developing more and more in the last 20 or 30 years. So that brings in another axis between the notions of flourishing and languishing. And these were terms that were developed by Dr. Corey Keyes, who is an academic who's been a leader in this field. And so flourishing is that state of most of the time, your sort of core state being positive mood, a sense of being engaged in life, of having a sense of purpose, a sense of goals, strong sense of self-esteem, strong sense of identity. So, and this tends to flow on into every aspect of your life, into the way you engage in study or in work, in relationships, in your family, your whānau, your community. By contrast, languishing has been described by some of the scholars as a hollow or empty life, and it's kind of the inverse. So low self-esteem, low mood, perhaps not of a level to be diagnosed as depression or anxiety, but generally a sort of low mood, low sense of engagement with life, not much sense of purpose, where life is going, sense of goals, not a strong sense of self-esteem or identity or sense of who a person is. And again, this makes people much more vulnerable to more significant mental distress and flows on into how they behave and act in every aspect of their lives. So if we think about mental health and well-being with those four dimensions, it gives us a much more dynamic and robust kind of way of considering our experience as human beings. And if we're thinking about students at schools, the experience of our students at schools. So if we're thinking about this approach, well, what does New Zealand look like? And I'm sorry, these colours have come out really differently on this version of the presentation, so I'm sorry if it's hard to read.
It looks like it's projected.
Oh, yeah, we'll blame it.
Sorry?
It looks fine on the display.
It's fine on the computer, not on the screen.
There we go, that's a bit better anyway. So, looking at a range of evidence, what does New Zealand look like? Well, only about a quarter of us can be said to be operating in that flourishing space, in that space of strong self-esteem, good sense of purpose, good sense of engagement. Nearly 1/3 of adults are operating in that languishing space, so not diagnosably mentally unwell, but low mood, low engagement, low sense of self-esteem and well-being. Some work that we did this year indicates that fully a quarter of the adult population, 18 and over, are struggling with their mental well-being as measured against a World Health Organisation tool right now. There actually hasn't been a comprehensive government-backed assessment of need in mental health since 2006. But when that was done, it indicated that 21% of all adults 18 and over would experience a diagnosable mental illness in any 12-month period. And you can be absolutely certain that it's got worse since then. And in fact, in the Mental Health and Addictions Inquiry, they referenced some longitudinal research coming out of Christchurch, which indicates over the course of a person's life, up to 80% of all of us will experience a time of significant mental distress. Now, that might seem shocking and surprising to people, but would we expect to go through our entire lives without having some kind of physical health challenges? So why do we expect that that would be different in relation to mental health? So that's kind of an indication of the baseline. And while these figures tend not to be looking at under 18-year-olds, we know in New Zealand that we have significant issues with poor mental health for our teenage population. So you can pretty much extrapolate those to young people. So this kind of more limited view that we've traditionally had, the sort of two-dimensional view between mental illness and just the lack of mental illness, has tended to drive traditional responses, which have been around treatment. They've been around trying to get people from that sense of mental illness to, well, let's just get them away from that. Let's deal with those symptoms of mental illness and try to stop those. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's an important part of the response. And it might be through medication, it might be counselling, therapy, many of the fine things that Family Works and Enliven do. So, you know, that traditional approach is certainly not without merit, but it is only really operating on that horizontal axis. So, in terms of our view, and I'm really hoping that this is going to show up on this slide, of our view of what the objective is, it's to move as many people in the population as possible into that flourishing space. Now, if you think about if the worthy axis is visible there, it would sort of be like a four-quadrant diagram. And so what's implied there is that in fact you can be operating in that flourishing space and still be experiencing mental distress or mental illness. And I can tell you that that's absolutely true. And the reason I know that is I'm a one-person sample because I live with bipolar disorder. And yet I believe most of the time I'm experiencing a flourishing state of being in the world. So yes, I have bipolar, it's a long-term mental illness. I always do air quotations because there's a lot of controversy around the diagnostic categories and all of that to do with mental illness. But yes, it's a long-term mental health challenge. And every couple of times a year the symptoms sort of jump up to bite me, but most of the time I'm a father, I have two teenagers, I've got an active sort of life, I'm a CEO, big, difficult, stressful, important job, and I live a good life. I'm engaged, I'm happy, I experience the ups and downs of life, but that's my core state of being. Now, yes, I'm on ongoing medication. Yes, I benefit from counselling and therapy from time to time, but there are also a wide range of other things which I incorporate into my life and other things that support me to be able to operate in that flourishing space. So regardless of whether people are experiencing mental distress and long-term mental illness challenges, the aim is to support people and give people the environments and the support that they can operate in that flourishing space, because there are multiple benefits throughout their lives and the lives of people around them. So, from this perspective, mental health is not so much what is wrong with you and how can you be fixed, which is more the traditional model. It's more about what has happened to you, what is your situation right now, and what is meaningful for you. So mental health is not about people catching something and then being cured. It's mostly about what has happened to us as people, how we deal with those things, and how we are supported to deal with those ups and downs of life. In that context, the environments in which we operate are very important, whether they're our family environments, our community environments, our work environments, or for young people, our schools. The nature of the environment that we operate in, and that has a big impact on our daily lives, can have a very big impact on our mental health. So, we consider that approaching any setting, whether it be workplaces, whānau, schools, the aim is to work to make those environments safe, strong and supportive. So, safe is about, is the environment actually psychologically and emotionally safe, or is it doing harm to people? Does it have hazards that are doing harm to students or to teachers for that matter? And in fact, the health and safety legislation now includes a responsibility of employers to ensure that workplaces, for example, are not doing harm, do not have psychological hazards for employees. You know, are schools strong? Are they actually doing the proactive things that uplift people's mental health and well-being and help to propel them into that flourishing state of being? And then, are they supportive? So that, you know, that traditional support, the pastoral care, the ability to provide for people's needs when they are struggling in an appropriate way, yes, of course, that continues to be an important part of responding to people's mental health. But those are the three key pillars, the three aspects of creating a positive environment for people's well-being in schools. So, thinking about safety, one of the critical factors, and if there was one thing I'd encourage you to focus on coming out of today, is bullying. New Zealand has a major issue with bullying, not just in schools and workplaces, but definitely in schools. So, you know, 32% of New Zealand students report being bullied at least a few times in the last month, compared to 23% for the average of all the OECD. You know, so we are in some of the worst in the world. Now, students that have experienced regular bullying at school are 4 times more likely to experience depression and anxiety throughout their lives. So the sense of being unsafe in the school environment, the trauma, the sense of being belittled, the sense of having your worth as a person diminished, the ongoing fear that comes from being in an environment where you're bullied has lifelong implications for young people. So in terms of a safety factor, I would put that right up there in terms of our duty in terms of the environment we're creating in schools. Culture and racism. There is absolutely clear evidence that affirmation of a person's cultural identity and ability to live that identity boosts mental well-being. And everybody in the school space is being challenged at the moment to consider why is it that Māori and Pasifika students consistently have lower academic attainment, yet in schools which affirm their culture, that they buck the trend. And we need to think hard about what racism actually is. And again, it goes back to that environment and the systems and the structures, the policies, the ways we do things on a day-to-day basis. Because racism is much more about the imposition of one culture's norms and ways of doing things on another culture than it is about, do I like you if you've got a brown skin or not? That's the obvious bit and we can deal with that. But if I'm in an environment where I do not feel that my identity as a person is actually being acknowledged, is being celebrated, is being uplifted, and the ways that I do things in my culture outside of the school environment are not validated inside the school environment, that creates a real tension. And often leads into sort of, can feed into bullying. So if there are two safety issues that I would stress, it is about looking at bullying and looking at culture and racism. In terms of, I'll just grab a glass of water. When I talk about talk about strong and uplifting people's mental well-being, people often think, well, what does that mean? What are we talking about? These are two models that the Mental Health Foundation uses, kind of fundamentals for our promotion of positive mental health. Now, one is obviously indigenous to Whare Tapawhā, which was developed by Sir Mason Jury in New Zealand, and the other is the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which comes out of the English public health system and is a kind of boiled down of over 300 pieces of evidence-based research. So Te Whare Tapawhā is really a way of expressing the need for balance in a person's life to support all forms of health, mental health included. So the analogy is that a whare, a house, can only be strong if its foundations and its walls and its roof are strong. You can't have a strong house if that wall is weak. The whole house will be weakened if one aspect is weakened. So we need to be able to strengthen our taha hinangaro, our mental and emotional well-being needs attention. Our taha wairoa, a spiritual sense of who we are and where we sit in the universe. Our taha tinana, yes, our physical self, vital. Our taha whānau, so our family and our social connection, and then the whenua, our sense of connection to place, to culture, to the land. Now those concepts actually all play very nicely with the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. As I say, they're not rocket science, but they're based on science. They came out of a detailed meta-analysis of clinical psychology, neuroscience, sports, coaching psychology. Last year, a piece of research that showed that just 2 hours of mild exercise across the course of a week increased a person's chance of having a healthy well-being score by 53%. So that's just one action. Actually spending time thinking about other people and acts of kindness, acts of generosity are actually really good for your mental health. And they play very nicely with the notion of connect. So stay connected with other people. We are inherently social beings and we need to work at our relationships, our connections, not only to family and whānau and those deep emotional relationships, but our sense of belonging. So what sense of belonging you create in a school is really important to people's mental health and well-being, and who are not included in that sense of belonging is also very important. Things that make us happy. Our brains, one of the great advantages of the human brain is that it can imagine the future and it can remember the past. And that allows us to learn from our past and project that into the future. And when we can't stop doing that, that drives things like rumination, anxiety, depression. So giving our brains regular rest from that process and actually bringing us into the moment is a really important part of mental health and well-being. Our brains need to rest, just as our bodies need to rest, just as our bodies need to rest, need to be active. And so that can be things like breathing exercises, it can be downtime built into school, it can be things like appreciation diary, you know, just 3 things a day that you really enjoyed, and noticing those things, because again, our brains are designed to notice threat. We've only, you know, our current state of being is just a nanosecond on the amount of time the human species has been in this state, and our brains have been designed to constantly look for threat in order to keep us alive. But we need to train ourselves in the modern context to also notice the things that keep us happy. And then keep learning. Our brains are actually designed to be inquisitive, to be open to new ideas. So, you know, schools is an excellent place for that, but, you know, we need to be encouraging our students not just to learn academically, but to keep an open and inquisitive mind. It really is a case of use it or lose it in terms of various aspects of brain health. So all of those things are based around behaviours. You can't just read that and get the benefit of it, you have to do it. And in fact, you don't even have to know that it's good for you to get the benefit of it if you do it. So working those kinds of activities into the life of a school can make a huge difference to sort of uplifting the well-being of students. So, just to round off with a few of the touch points that the Mental Health Foundation has on schools and on some of these issues. And this is a work in progress for us. We've had to be, like I'm sure Presbyterian Support would acknowledge, you know, opportunistic and use resources when they're available. But, you know, we're starting to get between us and some of our partners a good sort of smorgasbord of programs that will hopefully lead towards encouraging schools to take a whole school approach to well-being and to mental health. So a whole school approach to thinking about safety, strength and supportiveness in schools. So Pink Shirt Day, I'll finally pause to have some of this water. Pink Shirt Day, I don't know if any of the schools you're part of have participated in this. This is the tip of the iceberg of our work to reduce bullying. So the day itself is kind of a pinnacle where people get to, you know, kids get dressed up in pink, or many workplaces do the same, as a kind of expression of solidarity to work to reduce bullying. And you know, the antidote to bullying is really creating an environment where bullying cannot thrive. So an environment where kindness, celebration of difference and diversity, where belonging, you know, are uplifted. In those environments, bullying is hard to survive. There also needs to be the ability to sort of stand up and speak out and take action when bullying does occur. So it's a combination of building up those factors that will make it harder for bullying to happen and having an appropriate response when it does happen. Sparklers. So Sparklers has actually started here in Christchurch. It came out of the All Right campaign, which some of you may be aware of, which was a mental health, community-wide mental health support following the earthquakes. But it's an online program. There is now at least one teacher in 60% of primary and intermediate schools who are using Sparklers. So I'd be surprised if not someone in your schools who's using this. It's a range of classroom activities for primary and intermediate schools, from small games and activities to full lesson plans that are based around the principles and the science of well-being, such as the 5 Ways to Wellbeing and Te Whare Tapa Whā. As I say, it's got reach into 60% of schools, at least a little bit, and we are hoping to raise that to 80%. We've done some research on the impacts of sparklers, and what it showed us was that if you build that sense of well-being in a classroom, you are going to reduce antisocial behaviour, you're going to increase engagement with learning and education. So it's education-based. We have linked this back to the curriculum, but it's fundamentally aimed to grow that sense of well-being at a classroom-wide level. And I think one of the key things to the approach that we take is, yes, we need things like mana ake, we need school counsellors, we need school nurses, where a kid that is struggling, can get that support. However, when I talked to one of our youth champions, she goes, she said, well, high school counsellors, awkward, there is a huge amount of stigma around struggling with your mental health and well-being. And the traditional approach, from that mental illness to lack of mental illness, is about finding the people that are struggling and moving them that way. What we're trying to do is actually lift the well-being of whole classrooms and whole schools, because everybody benefits, and in fact it supports the well-being of those that are struggling to be part of a culture that talks about these kinds of things in an environment where everybody is participating in things that improve well-being. So what we've found is where schools are taking sparklers and applying it as a whole school, so they'll be going, right, this week we're going to use this exercise and this exercise, we're all going to try it out in the staff meeting, and we're going to try it for 2 weeks, then we'll move on and try this exercise and this exercise. Where it's being used as that kind of whole school tool, then naturally it has a much bigger impact than where you've got a teacher who will be pick and mixing. Now, it's designed to allow that pick and mix, but that's another option for people. It's a very easy first step into this kind of action. Pause, Breathe, Smile. This is another program that we developed over a number of years. It's based on the skills and techniques of mindfulness, so around that whole notion of using ways of taking notice, of centering people in the current moment. There is ample research to show that those approaches have a major impact on emotional regulation and teach skills that children can use throughout their lives. Now, it's actually been peer-reviewed in international academic circles, came out as was noted as one of the 20 evidence-based programs for schools around the world. And Southern Cross Insurance have now picked up Pause, Breathe, Smile as their showcase program, and they are funding it to go into schools, primary and intermediate schools, for free. So it's a program where teachers are trained in the techniques of using mindfulness as part of the classroom experience. Now, I can't remember whether this anecdote comes from Pause, Breathe, Smile or Sparklers. Actually, I can tell you another one first, just on Pause, Breathe, Smile. So there's a school in Tairawhiti in Gisborne, Decile 1 school, and they normally do not go outside of, so very, very large Māori population in the students. They adopted Pause, Breathe, Smile. In the 18 months after they adopted it, they have not had to write one behavioural management plan for a student. So it's been assessed by, independently evaluated by a Māori-led evaluation team, because it incorporates a lot of the components of Te Whare Tapa Whā. It evaluates incredibly well for being appropriate for Māori and non-European. But my anecdote is a kid of about 8 was, this stuff flows on into families, because parents learn these skills from their children. We also hear teachers love these programs in terms of what it does for them and their well-being. So kid's driving along, and his mother was cut off in the road by someone, driving badly. The mother got really upset, was, road rage, starting to swear, and this kid of about 8 goes, Mum, pull over to the side of the road. Right, now we're going to do tummy breathing. So, 3 deep breaths in. I love that. I just love that. Pause, breathe, smile. Also, available free to schools. Head First. This is another partnership that we're part of with New Zealand Rugby. Now, for many years, they have recognised that they need to put as much energy into the psychological fitness of the professional players as into the physical fitness. Ruby Tui and the All Blacks will tell you the reason why they're world champions is because of the top 10 inches. That's the bit that makes the difference. We've managed to work with the Movember Foundation to partner to allow them to take that approach now into school and club rugby, so incorporated it in rugby training, the skills, the techniques around mental well-being. It's still at a very early stage, it's still being rolled out, but I think Scots College is one of the colleges that has been part of the pilot for this. And it's evaluating very, very well. So another entry point into these same sort of activities and skills. Pink Shirt Day actually started from in Canada, where a kid was being bullied because he wore a pink shirt to school and he was gay. And actually a number of non-gay students there rallied around him, and they said, they put out a message on social media, everybody wear pink in solidarity, and they were blown away that about 50% of the school turned up in pink the next day. So it has its roots in trying to address homophobic and transphobic bullying. And so with some of the money that we raised through Pink Shirt Day, we've been able to fund rainbow inclusiveness workshops to occur throughout New Zealand. We work with Inside Out as our partner for that, and over the last 3 years I think we've delivered 60 of those workshops across the country. And the intention is to keep that momentum going as well. We also have a number of, so those are our kind of sort of programmatic responses. We also have a number of sort of campaigns in addition to Pink Shirt Day. So Mental Health Awareness Week is something we do annually across the whole country, but we have big reach into schools. And again, this is, I guess, giving a short, sharp burst of attention to these kinds of behaviours, actions, activities, knowledge that boost mental health and well-being. So this happens in October. I'm sure some of your schools will have already participated. The way I see these campaigns is they're kind of a booster to the ongoing work that schools can be doing, and a reminder to everybody of the types of approaches that people can take. So I'll wrap it up there. I'm happy to take any questions, but I did just want to leave you with this because one of the things that again has a big evidential base behind it that improves our mental well-being is connection with nature. In fact, just looking at that picture right now, there is clinical evidence to say that your brain chemistry is changing right at this moment. So we all need a little bit of boost to our mental well-being, so I'll leave you on that. Thank you.
We are into lunchtime, so can people talk to you?
Yeah, people can. I'll be around for a little while if people want to talk to me over lunch.
Shaun, it's my pleasure on behalf of everyone gathered here to thank you for that wonderful presentation. And in some ways your presentation comes at a very good time in this conference because I think it summarised a lot of what we've been hearing about. the central role that schools have in young people's well-being, and the fact that that will put them in a good place for the rest of their lives. And the second thing is the resources that are available to organisations like yours who actually help schools in addressing those things. You know, on a personal note, I want to honour your parents, Margaret and Anna. I came into ministry at 25, I was by myself, living in that mess. And your parents embody those qualities of welcoming and love and care that made such a difference for me in my future ministry. So, you know, you're hewn from that same cloth, as we would say, and part of that great gospel of affirming that life in all its fullness is what good news is all about. So thank you again, and lovely to see you.
Yeah.
Okay.